"Pick that up, sweetheart." That is what Dr. Whitfield said 47 minutes before the Air Force colonel's heart stopped beating. Cedar Creek Medical in San Antonio hums with the particular silence of a hospital at night, fluorescent lights creating a perpetual noon that never dims, the smell of antiseptic mixed with cafeteria coffee clinging to everything like a second uniform. The fourth floor belongs to the night shift, to the nurses and techs and residents who move through corridors in a state of controlled exhaustion, knowing that crisis can arrive at any moment and that they will be the ones who answer. Natalie Hayes arrives at 19:45 hours for her shift, parking her vehicle 3 rows from the entrance. She walks through the employee entrance without acknowledging the security guard, her badge already clipped to her scrubs. Her uniform is navy blue, practical, forgettable. Her name badge reads N. Hayes, RN, nothing more. The information is complete and incomplete at the same time. She stops at her locker on the way to the unit. Opens it. There, at the very bottom beneath her spare shoes and an unopened package of compression socks, sits a pair of combat boots. The leather is cracked and faded from desert sun that hasn't touched them in 17 years. The laces are frayed. One boot has a small piece of shrapnel still embedded in the heel. She stopped trying to remove it after the 3rd attempt. She touches them once, just her fingertips against the worn leather, the way someone else might touch a photograph. Then she closes the locker door and moves forward. The night shift briefing happens at 2000 hours in the break room. 6 nurses, 2 residents, a charge nurse named Patricia who has been working Cedar Creek for 19 years and has the tired eyes of someone who has seen everything fail and everything triumph in equal measure. They go through the census. 4th floor census is 12 patients tonight. Most stable. Most sleeping. Room for 12 is an Air Force colonel recovering from cardiac surgery, routine procedure, by-the-book outcome. Whitfield's surgical team closed him at 1,400 hours. Vitals have been stable since post-op. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that requires more than standard monitoring. Natalie Hayes listens without taking notes. Her memory is a military thing, a trained thing. Details lodge in her brain the way they lodge in stone. She watches room for 12 on the monitor as Patricia goes through the list. The colonel's chest rises and falls. Oxygen saturation 98%. Heart rate steady at 72. A quiet recovery. The break room smells like burnt coffee and the desperation of people who have chosen to work overnight when the rest of the world sleeps. Hayes stands with her hands on the edge of the table, shoulders relaxed, eyes tracking Patricia's chart. To anyone watching, she is the embodiment of a competent night nurse. Attentive. Professional. Unmemorable. At 20:15 hours, she moves to the 4th floor. Takes her post at the nurse's station. Organizes her charts. Her handwriting is surgical, each letter formed with the precision of someone trained to keep records that might someday be reviewed by command. Her abbreviations are exact. Her documentation is complete in ways that make the veteran nurses raise eyebrows. Most people don't write like they're preparing for a military audit, but Natalie Hayes does. She checks on room for 12 at 20:45 hours. The colonel is asleep. His cardiac monitor shows a perfect sinus rhythm, the green line dancing across the screen like a small, regular heartbeat that knows its job. She scans his chart. Vital stable every 15 minutes since extubation. No complications. No infections. A textbook recovery from a surgery that should have been routine. Except routine is what people call things when they don't understand what's underneath. She returns to the nurse's station. The night deepens. Around 100 hours, the hospital takes on a different quality, the sounds change, the rhythm changes. The fluorescent lights seem brighter against the darkness outside. The ventilators keep their mechanical whisper. The monitors keep their steady beep. The night nurses move through the corridors like people who have learned to exist in a place where normal rules don't apply. At 0130 hours, Dr. Whitfield enters the break room with the confident stride of a man who has never experienced consequences. He is followed by 2 attending physicians and a resident, 3 men in white coats, the uniform of authority at Cedar Creek. They do not acknowledge the nurse stations as they pass. They do not make eye contact with the staff. They move through the hospital the way generals move through outposts that belong to them. The break room door opens. Natalie Hayes is standing at the refrigerator, retrieving a plastic container of yogurt and the kind of determination it takes to eat something that tastes like nothing when you're running on your 4th hour of a night shift. She closes the refrigerator quietly. Turns. And then they are in the room. Whitfield is mid-sentence. Told him 84 at the back 9, which is absolute horseshit, because I watched him hit the ball into the water twice. His voice has the texture of privilege, the sound of a man who speaks because he assumes people will listen. He's tall. His watch costs more than some cars. His hair is silvered at the temples in a way that probably looks distinguished in the right light. He stops talking only when he notices her. "Still here," he says. The smile arrives before the words. "I had you pegged for a quitter." Hayes does not respond. She moves toward the coffee station, a small refrigerator in the corner where night shift staff keep their lunch containers and their overtime rage in equal measure. She has a tray, a small plastic rectangle with her coffee, her yogurt, a spoon she pulled from the drawer. Simple. Functional. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Cat got your tongue." One of the attending physicians laughs. It's a small, cruel sound that echoes off the break room walls. The other doctor joins him. Their laughter is the laughter of men who have never been taught that mockery requires an audience that consents. Whitfield steps directly into her path. Not blocking it, not yet. Just positioning himself in the space between her and the doorway. He is close enough that she can smell his cologne. Expensive. Something with notes of cedar and something darker underneath. The smile on his face is the smile of a predator who has identified prey that cannot fight back. I said, "What's wrong?" His voice drops. It becomes something more intimate. "Are you ignoring me?" Hayes does not look at him. She keeps her eyes forward, on the doorway, on the path that leads back to the unit and to room for 12 and to the colonel who is sleeping peacefully while his cardiac surgeon stands in the break room playing games with a night nurse who has seen things that would stop this man's heart if he actually understood them. Her jaw tightens. Just once. A small muscle contraction, barely visible. The only acknowledgement that she has heard him. Whitfield's smile sharpens. And then he moves. It happens with the casual confidence of someone who has never experienced resistance. His hand comes up. Not a punch. Not a strike. Something worse, something designed to humiliate rather than injure. His hand catches her tray at the edge, the movement fast enough and hard enough that the plastic rectangle becomes airborne. The coffee cup goes with it. The yogurt container follows. The spoon clatters against the tile floor first, the sound ringing out like a small bell announcing that something has changed in the break room. The coffee spreads across the floor in a brown stain, steaming, spreading toward the refrigerator and the counter and creating a landscape of waste that smells like burnt caffeine and deliberate cruelty. The yogurt container bounces once and splits open, vanilla-flavored content spilling across the tile in a pattern that looks almost obscene. The attending physicians stare at the spreading mess. Their laughter has stopped. Their faces are the faces of men who have just realized that what they thought was a game has revealed something underneath, that there is a line being crossed and they are all standing on the same side of it, and the consequences of that are not yet clear. Whitfield's smile never wavers. "Pick that up, sweetheart." He steps over the mess with the deliberate care of someone who is certain he will not be questioned. I'd hate to see our nursing standards slip any further than they already have. The break room goes very quiet. The fluorescent lights seem louder somehow, their electronic hum becoming the only sound in the space. Hayes moves. Not quickly. Not slowly. She moves with the precision of someone who has done this before, who has picked up after people in positions of power, who has accepted the small humiliations that come with being invisible in a place where visibility would mean danger. She bends. Her knees flex. Her hands move to the tile. She has done this 17 times in different languages, in different countries, under different circumstances. Muscle memory is a cruel thing. The body remembers what the mind is trying to forget. Whitfield throws the charts. 3 or 4 of them, grabbed from the counter and scattered across the floor with the casual gesture of a man dropping garbage. They land near the mess, paper falling like snow, patient information spreading across the tile in violation of a dozen protocols that are written but never enforced against people in white coats. That too, he says. And then he walks away, his 2 attending physicians trailing behind him like remoras following a shark. The door swings closed. The break room becomes very small. Hayes continues cleaning. Her hands are perfectly steady. The trembling that exists is not fear. The trembling that exists, if it exists at all, is something else entirely. Restraint. Discipline. 20 years of military service teaching her that the moment you show them you can break is the moment they will spend resources trying to break you further. She places the wet paper towels in the trash. Rinses her hands under the break room sink, the water running warm and purposeful. Her reflection in the mirror above the sink is the reflection of a nurse. Soft-spoken. Punctual. Forgettable. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 40 minutes later, when Hayes found herself alone in the supply closet restocking the 4 cart, and her hands finally let go. She reached for the metal shelf that holds the sterile gauze pads and the saline flushes and the mundane tools of modern medicine. Her grip tightened. Her knuckles went white. The metal shelf was cold and unyielding, and she held on as if it might float away if she didn't anchor herself to something real. The supply closet has no windows. No fluorescent lights. No mirrors. It is a place where she can exist without being seen. She closes her eyes. And in that darkness, behind her closed eyelids, she is not in San Antonio. She is in Fallujah, 2004, moving through the rubble of a collapsed structure with mortar fire creating percussion in the distance and the weight of a 6-year-old boy in her arms, not a boy anymore, not really, just a body. Just a small life that still had a pulse because she had checked twice and the pulse was there, and so she carried him forward through streets that were no longer streets because the war had eaten the infrastructure and left only broken things in its place. Her locker is in the employee room. She goes there after she restocks the cart. Opens it. Reaches to the very bottom. The combat boots are still there. The leather is still cracked. The shrapnel is still embedded in the heel. She touches them again, just her fingertips, and remembers what it felt like to run in boots like these, to move through populated areas where civilians and combatants looked the same and every decision had consequences that echoed into futures she would never see. The colonel in room for 12 is still sleeping. His cardiac monitor still shows that perfect sinus rhythm. His oxygen saturation is still 98%. Everything is exactly as it should be in a recovery that is textbook and unremarkable and designed not to require someone who remembers Fallujah in ways that don't fade with coffee or sleep or the passage of 17 years. Hayes closes her locker door. Returns to the unit. Takes her post at the nurse's station. Charts with the precision of someone trained to keep records that might someday be reviewed by people who understand what those records represent. And she waits. Because waiting is also something she has learned to do with perfect composure, with hands that do not shake, with a jaw that tightens only once when the world reveals its cruelty and expects her to accept it quietly. The night continues. The hospital hums. And somewhere in room for 12, a man who has no idea he is being monitored by a Master Chief Petty Officer sleeps the sleep of the unconcerned, his heart beating steadily, his recovery proceeding exactly as planned, for now. The hospital hums around her. Hayes sits at the nurse's station on the 4th floor, the kind of quiet workspace that exists only between midnight and dawn, when the world sleeps and the charts don't lie. A single halogen desk lamp casts pale light across the patient documentation spread in front of her. She reads the entries methodically, her pen moving with surgical precision as she cross-references lab values, medication orders, and procedure notes. Her charting style is a habit from 20 years of military service, every detail documented, every discrepancy noted, every decision traceable. In field medicine, sloppy paperwork meant soldiers died in follow-up care. Accountability was religion. It still was. Room for 12, 3 doors down the hallway, contains the Air Force colonel. His chart shows a routine valve replacement performed by Dr. Whitfield 2 weeks ago. Hayes has reviewed the surgical notes, the post-op labs, the recovery trajectory. What strikes her, what makes her narrow her eyes and lean closer to the page, is a pattern. The billing codes don't match the actual procedures documented. The device charges are inflated. The surgical time logged exceeds the reality captured in the anesthesia record by nearly 40 minutes. Small discrepancies individually. Collectively, they form a picture. She pulls 3 more charts from the rolling rack beside her desk, other Whitfield patients from the past 2 years. She reads them with the same attention she once applied to casualty reports in Fallujah. The pattern repeats. Again. 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 Hayes' jaw tightens. She doesn't write anything in the margins. She doesn't make notes on a separate pad. She simply reads, and remembers, and understands. The charting itself becomes the evidence. Her detailed documentation of actual times, actual medications, actual procedures performed will sit in the system, publicly visible, waiting like a loaded weapon for someone with authority to compare it to the billing records. Whitfield doesn't know his 2-year kickback scheme with medical device suppliers has been systematically exposed by the meticulous notes of a night nurse he believes is temporary help. He doesn't know that every inflated charge, every phantom procedure, every device he installed without medical necessity has been recorded in real time by someone trained to notice discrepancies under mortar fire. He doesn't know he's being documented the way military interrogators document war crimes. At 0130 hours, Hayes needs coffee. The break room sits at the end of the 4th floor corridor, a small space with a refrigerator that smells like old milk and a coffee maker that gurgles like a dying animal. She fills her cup and turns to leave. The door opens. Dr. Whitfield enters with 3 attending physicians, mid-conversation about a golf weekend in Scottsdale. He sees Hayes and his face rearranges itself into something that resembles a smile. The smile is a shark's smile. It never reaches his eyes. "Gentlemen," Whitfield says, his voice the color of expensive whiskey poured over ice, "I'll bet you $50 this one doesn't make it to her 90-day review." The other doctors shift uncomfortably. One of them looks at his shoes. Hayes continues pouring coffee, her hand perfectly steady. The pot doesn't shake. The stream doesn't waver. She sets it back in the cradle and turns toward the door. Whitfield steps closer, blocking the path. His elbow catches the cafeteria tray stacked on the counter, intentional, though deniable. Coffee splashes across the linoleum floor, pooling around Hayes' shoes in a brown archipelago. The liquid is still hot. She can feel the warmth radiating upward through her scrub bottoms. "Pick that up, sweetheart," Whitfield says with a smile that has learned how to mimic human warmth without ever achieving it. His voice carries the weight of institutional authority. He's wearing a $12,000 watch that catches the fluorescent light. His cologne smells like department store sophistication applied to a fundamentally hollow man. Hayes sets down her coffee cup. She reaches for the paper towels without comment. Her expression remains completely neutral, the way a soldier's face goes blank during a strip search, the way a mother's face goes still while holding a sick child. She kneels without a word. Her knees meet the wet floor. The other physicians watch in silence, their discomfort manifesting as stillness. Nobody moves. Nobody speaks. Whitfield drops a stack of patient charts at her feet. They land with a papery slap. One sheet skitters across the wet tile and comes to rest against the cabinet. "And refile these," Whitfield continues, his voice the sound of a man confident in his dominance. "Alphabetically. Your charting style is, well, unnecessarily detailed. Makes everyone else look bad." Another chart hits her shoulder. It doesn't hurt. It isn't designed to hurt. It's designed to establish hierarchy. Hayes picks them up methodically, one by one, while the physicians maintain their uncomfortable silence. She doesn't look up. She doesn't speak. Her hands don't tremble. The room smells like spilled coffee and the specific stale air of a place where power is being performed. Later, alone in the supply closet on the 6th floor, Hayes grips the edge of a metal shelf. Her knuckles turn white. The shelves stretch upward into shadow, stacked with sterile gauze, saline bags, and the clinical infrastructure of modern medicine. She stares at nothing, breathing through her nose. The trembling isn't fear. It's restraint. It's the accumulated weight of keeping her voice soft, keeping her posture deferential, keeping the competent military officer sealed inside the temporary night nurse like a weapon in a locked case. She closes her eyes and remembers something else, the weight of a 6-year-old boy in her arms, carried through gunfire in a bombed-out section of Fallujah, the smell of dust and blood, the certainty that if she moved wrong he would die. She'd moved perfectly. She opens her eyes. She lets go of the shelf. Her breathing returns to baseline. The next night, Whitfield encounters Hayes in the hallway outside room for 12. A patient's family is present, an elderly woman, the colonel's sister. Whitfield places his hand on Hayes' shoulder with the familiarity of a man accustomed to touching people without asking. He's performing doctoring for the family's benefit. Nightingale here is very new, he says, his smile cosmetic and practiced. Still learning the basics. Not to worry, though. I'll make sure she doesn't accidentally give you the wrong medication. The sister laughs politely. Hayes' expression doesn't change. She's learned that invisibility is a tactic. The best warriors, the most effective operators, are the ones nobody remembers seeing. 2 nights later, Hayes questions a medication dosage on another Whitfield patient. The order is for a drug combination that doesn't match the diagnosis. It's not dangerous, it's just unnecessarily expensive. Whitfield is writing notes at the medication station when she approaches. She keeps her voice soft, deferential, genuinely uncertain in tone. Doctor, I wanted to confirm the dosage on the vancomycin for room for 18. The dose seems high for his renal function. Whitfield doesn't look up from his documentation. He pats her shoulder, the way a person pats a dog that has performed a simple trick. Sweetheart, when you have an MD after your name, you can play doctor. Until then, just do what you're told. His voice is pleasant. His hand lingers on her shoulder 1 second longer than necessary. Hayes' jaw clenches once, then releases. She nods and withdraws without another word. She continues her charting without visible reaction, but her documentation of the actual medication administered, the actual timing, the actual clinical response of the patient becomes a permanent record. The billing code Whitfield entered and the medication she documented in real time don't align. Another layer. Another exposure. Her charting style, born from 20 years of military accountability where every decision in the field had to be justifiable to command, is beginning to reveal the systematic pattern in Whitfield's billing. He doesn't understand that a person trained to document casualties under fire will find him transparently obvious. She's noting dates, times, procedures performed, procedures billed, device serial numbers, supplier invoices referenced, and the clinical outcomes that don't require the expensive interventions he's implementing. It's all there. Public record. Waiting. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was understanding that she had 5 months left on her assignment. 5 months of kneeling in coffee. 5 months of being called Nightingale. 5 months of maintaining the mask while the evidence accumulated like snow, weight building silently, waiting for the right moment to collapse the whole structure. She thinks about the colonel sleeping in room for 12, a man she's been sent to monitor for reasons she still doesn't fully understand. She thinks about the gap between what's documented and what's real, the space where people like Whitfield operate, the space where patients get hurt not from negligence but from profit margins applied to human bodies. At 02 for 5 hours 2 nights later, Hayes notices something in the colonel's central venous pressure readings that makes her stop breathing for exactly 3 seconds. The number shouldn't be that high. The trajectory shouldn't be climbing. She sets down her pen and looks at the cardiac monitor feed showing his room. His heart rate is up. His blood pressure is down. Classic signs that something has turned wrong in the recovery space. Whitfield declared finished and safe. She pages the on-call attending. Whitfield intercepts the call and arrives instead, annoyed at being disturbed at 2:45 in the morning. Hayes explains her assessment in calm, measured tones. She's careful to frame it as observation, not diagnosis. She's learned how to make competence look like deference. Whitfield barely glances at the monitor. He's fine. Post-surgical inflammation. Stop panicking. His voice carries the weight of a man who has never been questioned successfully, who has never faced consequences for his decisions. Hayes keeps her voice level. Each word is placed with precision. Doctor, his hemodynamics suggest cardiac tamponade. Whitfield cuts her off with a gesture, the way someone swats away an insect. I performed the surgery. I think I know my own patient better than a night nurse with 6 weeks' experience. He orders her to give a mild diuretic and return to her other patients. The instruction is polite. The instruction is a command. The instruction will be documented in the patient's chart in Whitfield's handwriting, a medical decision made by someone who declined to examine the patient, who dismissed the observations of someone with direct access to vital signs. Hayes stands motionless for 3 seconds, looking at the colonel's face, then at the monitor, then at Whitfield. Her hands don't shake. She doesn't argue. She doesn't appeal to his judgment or his decency, because she understands that some people don't possess the raw materials for either. Yes, doctor, she says softly. But she doesn't leave the floor. She doesn't return to her other patients. She simply repositions herself at the nurse's station with a direct sightline to room for 12, the cardinal rule of field medicine embedded in her bones. When something smells wrong, when the data contradicts the assessment, when your gut tells you the command structure has made a mistake, you don't abandon the position. You stay. You watch. You document everything. Maria, the other night nurse, whispers as she passes with a medication cart. You should just do what he said. Hayes doesn't respond. Her eyes remain fixed on the screen showing the colonel's vitals. The numbers are trending the wrong direction. Blood pressure sliding. CVP climbing. Heart rate accelerating. The story written in numbers is very clear to anyone trained to read it. The story is about a man whose heart is being compressed by fluid that nobody has addressed. The story is about time running out. At 0300 hours exactly, the monitor flatlines. The cardiac alarm screams through the 4th floor, a sound like the world ending, urgent and mechanical and impossibly loud. Hayes is already moving. The cardiac alarm screams through the 4th floor at 0245 hours, a sound like the world ending, urgent and mechanical and impossibly loud. Hayes is already moving before the second cycle completes, her legs carrying her down the corridor at a pace that isn't quite a run but isn't walking either, a controlled sprint that suggests someone who's learned to move through chaos without disturbing the air around her. Room for 12. The colonel's monitor shows a flat line that makes her stomach drop, not from fear but from recognition. She's seen this pattern before. In Fallujah. In a compound outside Sanjin. In places where blood loss and shock and crushing pressure on the heart meant you had approximately 90 seconds to decide who lived and who became a name on a memorial. Maria Chen, the night shift nurse assigned to the colonel's care, stands frozen in the doorway with her hands pressed against her mouth. Hayes pushes past her without acknowledgement, muscle memory and 20 years of combat medicine overriding every civilian protocol Cedar Creek Medical has written into its policy manual. The colonel's neck veins bulge grotesquely, engorged and pulsing with pressure they were never designed to hold. His skin has taken on the grayish pallor of inadequate perfusion. She doesn't need the ultrasound machine that someone should have brought 5 minutes ago. She doesn't need Dr. Whitfield's consultation or the code team's hesitation or anybody's permission. She needs a needle and 15 seconds of absolute clarity. The monitors shriek. One flat line. One blood pressure cuff reading nothing at all. One oxygen saturation dropping like a stone into water, 88, 82, 76, and Hayes' hands are already moving toward the emergency supply drawer, opening it with the kind of precise violence that comes from knowing exactly what you need and where it lives. a 14-gauge cardiac needle, 1 milliliter syringe, 1 three-way stopcock. The equipment of emergency medicine. The equipment of keeping people alive when their bodies have decided otherwise. She'd reviewed the colonel's chart at 0120 hours, sitting in the dimly lit nursing station while the hospital settled into its deepest sleep cycle. His central venous pressure had been climbing all evening, a slow, insidious rise that anyone trained in cardiac physiology would recognize as dangerous. The routine valve replacement performed 3 days earlier should have resulted in a straightforward recovery. Should have. But the operative report told a different story if you knew how to read between the numbers. Whitfield had billed for a standard replacement at $18,400, but the actual procedure, based on operative time, equipment used, and post-operative course, suggested something cheaper, faster, less meticulous. A valve replacement that cut corners where cutting corners meant blood pooling in places it shouldn't. Fluid accumulating around the heart. Tamponade developing like a slow-motion strangling of the organ itself. Hayes had pulled the billing codes while the colonel slept. Routine replacement, listed as such. But the surgical notes mentioned expedited technique and cost-effective approach, phrases that made her jaw clench in that particular way she'd learned to control. The pattern matched everything else Whitfield had done for 2 years. Everything she'd been documenting in her meticulous notes. Everything that proved he was padding some bills and cutting corners on others, always in directions that moved money toward his pocket and away from actual patient care. The code team arrives through the double doors like a controlled avalanche. Dr. Chen, the night hospitalist, a competent physician with excellent instincts but the fatal flaw of believing in chain of command, sees what Hayes is preparing to do and opens his mouth to object. "That's not in your scope," he starts, but Hayes is already measuring landmarks on the colonel's chest with the calloused fingers that have done this exact procedure under mortar fire, in the dark, with nothing but battlefield instinct and the knowledge that hesitation means death. 5th intercostal space. Just left of the sternum. The needle goes in at a 45-degree angle toward the left shoulder, advancing with the kind of precision that comes from having your hand steadied by something deeper than training, something like muscle memory pressed into bone. The insertion takes 3 seconds. 30 more seconds to find the fluid. The syringe draws back and blood-tinged fluid flows into it like confirmation of everything she already knew. 70 milliliters. 90 milliliters. 120 milliliters of accumulated blood and serous fluid that had been slowly crushing the colonel's heart with the patience of gravity. The room seems to rotate. The monitors shift from their death song to something almost normal. The colonel gasps, an actual breath, actual air entering lungs that had been suffocating seconds before. His oxygen saturation climbs like a rescue ladder. 76, 82. 88, 94. Sinus rhythm returns. Not the chaotic electrical noise of a failing heart, but the steady organized rhythm of a cardiac muscle suddenly freed from compression. The monitor beeps its affirmation once, twice, 3 times. Steady. Alive. Dr. Chen stares at Hayes. Then at the syringe. Then back at Hayes like she's transformed into something he doesn't have language for. His mouth moves soundlessly. Maria's hand has moved from her mouth to her throat. 3 residents and 2 nursing students who arrived with the code team stand in poses of suspended disbelief, their training colliding with what they've just witnessed, a night nurse performing an advanced cardiac procedure with the kind of casual precision that belongs to people who've done it hundreds of times. "How did you?" Dr. Chen's voice cracks on the first word. "Where did you learn?" Hayes' hands remain completely steady as she secures the needle with tape, checking the placement one more time with the automatic focus of someone whose competence doesn't require validation. She should have stayed silent. She should have murmured something deferential about advanced nursing certifications or online training modules. She should have let Dr. Chen believe she was something close to ordinary. Instead, she meets his eyes directly, and when she speaks, her voice has dropped an octave from the soft deferential tone everyone at Cedar Creek has come to expect from the quiet nurse on the 4th floor. "Battlefield medicine," she says quietly. The 3 words land in the room like a detonation. Naval combat trauma training. Fallujah, 2007. Sanjin Valley, 2011. FOB Shank, 2014. The silence that follows is the kind of silence that has weight. Maria's eyes go wide with the kind of understanding that arrives like lightning, sudden and transformative. The residents exchange glances. One of them mouths a word that might be combat or might be impossible. Hayes can see the moment the pieces begin to assemble themselves in their minds. The meticulous charting that caught Whitfield's discrepancies. The calm competence in every procedure. The specific knowledge of where equipment lived and how bodies failed. The way she moved like someone who'd already survived the worst that medicine or violence could offer. Her cover hasn't just cracked. It shattered like glass struck by a single precise blow. The Colonel's breathing stabilizes. His color improves. The monitors sing their steady reassuring rhythm, and Hayes knows with the kind of certainty that comes from experience that he's going to survive this. The fluid accumulation is drained. The crushing pressure is relieved. The heart, that remarkable organ that Whitfield had failed through negligence, is beating on its own again, strong and purposeful. She's bought him time. She's bought him a future. She just cost herself her mission. Hayes steps back from the bedside, and that's when her phone vibrates in her scrub pocket. A text message from an unknown number, encrypted through a routing she immediately recognizes as Pentagon-level secure. 4 words, code name confirmed. Incoming. The alarm screamed at 0300 hours. A single sustained note that cut through the 4th floor of Cedar Creek Medical like a blade. The Colonel's heart monitor flatlined, a horizontal line of absolute silence where rhythm should have been. Fluid. Pericardial fluid accumulating around his heart from a surgery Whitfield had billed at double necessity, compressing the organ until it simply stopped. Code blue. Room for 12. The code team froze in the doorway 2 floors down, charts in hand, still processing the page. They were moving toward the elevator when they saw her. Hayes was already sprinting, her white shoes squeaking against the tile, past the nurse's station, past the crash cart she didn't need because she knew exactly what she needed. Muscle memory didn't just take over. Muscle memory ran the show. The room was chaos when she arrived. The Colonel lay grey-faced, oxygen mask fogging and clearing, useless without a heartbeat to deliver blood to his brain. 20 seconds. That was all he had. Hayes didn't hesitate. Didn't look for permission or authorization. She grabbed a 14-gauge cardiac needle from the emergency tray, her hand steady as a surgical laser. The needle went in at the 4th intercostal space, just below the left nipple. She angled it 45 degrees toward the right shoulder. The team watched, frozen, as she drew back on the plunger. 40 milliliters of dark fluid came out. Then 60. Then 120. The hiss of air escaping. That sound. That specific whisper of a collapsed pericardium re-expanding. Sinus rhythm, Dr. Chen said, his voice hollow with shock. O2 sat climbing. 87. 92. 98. The Colonel's eyes flickered. His chest rose and fell on his own again. A heartbeat. Then another. Then a rhythm that held. Hayes stepped back. She didn't acknowledge the stares or the silence that suddenly filled the room like water. She just disposed of the needle, documented the time 0305 hours, and walked out past the code team, whose mouths were still open. One of them, a young resident, whispered something to Dr. Chen that echoed down the hallway. Did she just save his life in 40 seconds? By 0500 hours, the entire 4th floor knew. Nurses clustered at the supply closet. Doctors reviewed Dr. Chen's charting, his notes reading like testimony, the most precise emergency intervention I've witnessed outside a cardiac surgical suite. Master-level execution. Procedure duration, 40 seconds. Immediate stabilization. Textbook perfect. Hayes sat at the nurse's station, charting. Her expression was a still pond. Around her, staff kept glancing sideways, whispering, pointing. Maria from the day shift stood near the coffee station, arms crossed, staring at her with something that looked like or mixed with confusion. Nobody understood. She was the quiet one. The nurse they barely noticed. The one Whitfield had been grinding under his heel for 6 weeks. Whitfield arrived at 0800 hours. He heard the whispers before he saw the charts. His face went pale, actually pale, a sickly shade of cream and ash. He pulled the colonel's complete medical record, his jaw tightening as he read Hayes' documentation. Every post-surgical vital sign. Every blood pressure check. Every moment where she had documented the colonel's deteriorating condition. And then, there in her own handwriting, recommend immediate echo or bedside ultrasound to rule out pericardial effusion. Patient reports chest pressure and shortness of breath. Tamponade symptoms evident. She had written it at 2,300 hours the previous evening. 16 hours before the code. Whitfield had dismissed her. Had called her overly cautious and wasting valuable resources on unnecessary imaging for a routine recovery. By 0900 hours, he was on his office phone. His voice was tight, controlled, but Hayes could hear him from the hallway, the same tone of voice he'd used when throwing charts at her feet. I want an immediate investigation into this nurse's credentials. Yes. Hayes. She performed a cardiac procedure last night that's completely outside her scope of practice. She endangered that patient, potentially saved him from liability, and I have serious concerns about the legitimacy of her nursing license. A pause. Then, I don't care if she stabilized him. She practiced medicine without a license. Get an outside investigator. I want her employment terminated by noon. He filed the incident report at 0930 hours. On his official letterhead. With 3 signatures from board members he'd called before dawn, men who owed him favors, men whose kids he'd helped place at private schools, men who didn't ask questions when he framed his requests as concerns about patient safety and hospital liability. By 10:45 hours, security was walking toward the 4th-floor nurses' station. 2 officers. One older, one young. Their posture was formal but not unkind. They stopped in front of Hayes, who was still charting, still composed, still a still pond in a room full of ripples. Miss Hayes, we need you to come with us. She stood. Didn't ask why. Didn't ask for an explanation or a chance to respond or anything at all. She just stood, clicked her pen, and set it down on the nurse's station next to her half-finished charting. The walk to the parking garage felt like moving through water. Past Maria, who looked away. Past Dr. Chen, whose expression twisted with confusion and something that looked like anger. Past the other nurses who had just finished celebrating her as the miracle worker, now witnessing her removal like she'd never been real at all. The cardboard box sat on the security office desk. Her locker contents. The worn combat boots on top, the same boots she'd worn in Fallujah when she'd pulled a 6-year-old boy from a collapsed building, his blood mixing with the dust on the leather. A few personal items. Her nameplate. Your employment is terminated pending investigation, the older officer said, not meeting her eyes. You're not to return to Cedar Creek Medical Property. Legal will be in touch. Hayes took the box. It wasn't heavy. Her entire life outside of the military had never been heavy. She drove down to the parking garage in silence. Sat in her car with the engine off, head pressed against the steering wheel. The box on the passenger seat. Those boots staring at her like accusers. Her mission burned. Her cover destroyed. 6 weeks of documenting Whitfield's crimes, 6 weeks of enduring his humiliation, 6 weeks of restraint and composure and holding herself together, all of it gone. She'd saved the colonel's life, and it had cost her everything. She couldn't move. The boots had blood in the leather. She'd tried to clean them once, years ago, and the blood had just smeared deeper into the creases. Some stains don't wash out. Some things don't recover. And that's when the real nightmare began. She heard boots on concrete. Multiple pairs. Moving with military precision. The sound of a Humvee door closing. Voices calling out numbers and coordinates and her name. Hayes looked up. Security escorted Hayes to the parking garage at 11:41 a.m., her belongings in a cardboard box that smelled like the break room, stale coffee and Whitfield's cologne. Her hand stayed steady as she carried it. Not trembling. Not shaking. Just steady. The security guard, a retired Marine sergeant named Holloway, wouldn't meet her eyes. He knew what this was. He'd watched Whitfield make the calls, watched the board members nod along, watched the investigation materialize out of thin air the moment she'd saved the colonel's life. Holloway held the elevator door open for her. She said nothing. There was nothing to say. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical rhythm as the elevator descended, and Hayes felt the weight of the box against her ribs, not heavy, not really, but final. The parking garage smelled like concrete dust and hot asphalt bleeding through from the afternoon sun. Her car sat in the same spot she'd parked it 22 hours earlier. 22 hours since the code blew. 22 hours since her cover had shattered under the perfect execution of a 40-second procedure that no night shift nurse was supposed to know how to perform. She sat in the driver's seat with the door open, the box on the passenger side, engine dead. Her head pressed against the steering wheel. She didn't move for minutes. For minutes of breathing through her nose, letting the cool air of the garage settle in her lungs, not fighting it, not controlling it, just breathing. The combat boots sat beside the cardboard box, worn leather the color of dried blood, sand still embedded in the laces from Fallujah. She'd kept them hidden in her locker for 18 months, waiting for extraction, waiting for the moment her cover would burn. She hadn't expected it to burn like this. The radio on her hip, the one disguised as a hospital pager, vibrated once. Then again. Then 3 times in rapid succession, the emergency pattern. Hayes lifted her head. She should have left the parking garage. She should have kept driving. Instead, she keyed the encrypted channel. Static, then a voice, Angel 6, we have movement. Repeat, armed personnel en route to your location. ETA for minutes. Armed personnel. MPs. The Pentagon had made the call. Hayes' eyes moved to the rearview mirror. A convoy of black Suburbans was descending the parking garage ramp, lights off but movement deliberate, professional, military. 3 vehicles. She counted the personnel through the tinted glass, 6 operators visible, load-bearing vests, sidearms, the kind of team you sent when you needed to extract someone from hostile territory. They weren't hostile territory. They were San Antonio. They were a hospital parking garage. But the Pentagon didn't send a 6-person extraction team for nothing. She reached for the door handle and stepped out of the car with the boots in her left hand. Her right hand stayed visible, open, palm forward. Not a threat position. Not a surrender position either. Just honest. The lead Suburban decelerated hard, dust and burnt rubber creating a halo in the afternoon heat. The doors opened in sequence, side door first, then passenger door, then driver. The point man was a captain with the kind of scarred hands that came from 16 years of EOD work. Hayes recognized him. Captain Mercer. Task Force support out of JSOC. He'd been her medical liaison during 3 separate operations in Kandahar province. Master Chief, he said, and it wasn't a question. Captain, she replied. We need to secure you and move you inside. His eyes didn't leave hers. There's been a development. The hospital's already terminated my assignment. Her voice didn't waver. It was someone else's voice, older, steadier, not the careful night shift nurse voice she'd spent 18 months perfecting. My cover's compromised. Mission's over. Your cover's not why we're here, Mercer said. Federal auditors hit Cedar Creek Medical's billing department 45 minutes ago. FBI, NCIS, and the Pentagon's Inspector General. They've got warrants for Whitfield's files, his computer, everything related to veteran patient accounts. Hayes, he didn't just try to burn you. He created evidence of consciousness of guilt when he did. Hayes let that settle. The Pentagon didn't send extraction teams for terminated assignments. They sent them for escalations. For complications that had become federal crimes. She looked toward the hospital, 5 stories of beige brick and mirrored windows, the same structure where she'd spent 18 months documenting a man's thievery in the margins of patient charts, her meticulous military-trained handwriting becoming the paper trail that would dismantle him. Whitfield called board members. Mercer continued. "We have the transcripts now. He specifically claimed you were mentally unstable and a liability risk. He told them you might have fabricated patient information. He suggested you could be prosecuted for practicing outside your scope during that code blue this morning. That last part, that manufactured complaint, that's what gave the auditors the legal threshold they needed to subpoena everything." Hayes understood then. Whitfield had tried to bury her. In doing so, he'd created the paper trail that buried him. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 18 months learning his patterns, documenting his shortcuts, watching him inflate surgical complexity and collect kickbacks from device suppliers, but it was his desperation to eliminate her that had made it federal. "I need you to understand something," Mercer said, stepping closer. His voice dropped. "That colonel you saved? His name is James Mitchell. He's not just Air Force. He's 160th SAW Command Staff. And before he was military, before he became colonel, he was a 6-year-old boy in Fallujah who watched a Navy corpsman pull him from a collapsed building under fire." Hayes' hands went still. The boots became heavier. 6-year-old. Fallujah. Building collapse in the Jolan district, February 2006, small arms fire from 2 directions, and a child's body hanging limp in her arms as she ran toward the extraction point. She'd never known his name. The Pentagon classified those operations. She'd never known if he'd survived the infection from the wound, or the fever that came after, or the paperwork that followed. She'd pulled dozens of people from rubble. Dozens. "How long have you known?" Hayes asked. 72 hours, Mercer said. "Mitchell recognized your name when his file was flagged for this assignment. He requested you specifically. He told the director he wanted to verify something about the only person he remembered from those operations. That you were his angel. That you carried him through fire and didn't let him fall." Hayes gripped the boots tighter. The leather creased under pressure. She didn't respond. There was no response that fit this moment. Mercer gestured toward the Suburban. "Whitfield's looking at federal fraud charges," Mercer said. "Minimum 8 counts. His medical license enters emergency review today. The hospital's severing all ties. But that's not the reason we're here. We're here because Cedar Creek Medical's board wants to know if you'd consider staying, in a different capacity. Running their veteran services program. Officially. No cover. No undercover assignment. Just a master chief doing the work she was trained to do." The parking garage fell silent. 3 stories up, a horn sounded somewhere in the afternoon traffic. A motorcycle passed on the street outside, its engine a brief aggressive growl that faded toward the highway. Hayes' eyes moved across the concrete floor, stained with decades of oil, worn smooth in traffic patterns, indifferent to the lives that had just pivoted around it. "I'll need 3 things," Hayes said. Her voice had dropped an octave. "Not the night nurse anymore. Full access to veteran patient files for oversight purposes. An independent auditor role, no administrator approval required for chart reviews. And permission to implement trauma-informed protocols for service members in recovery." Mercer didn't hesitate. "Already approved. The board signed off 2 hours ago. They want to rebuild. They want someone they can trust. They want someone who knows what it costs." Hayes looked down at the boots in her hands. Fallujah leather. 20 years of dust compressed into creases and worn seams. She'd carried them from one assignment to the next, from one city to another, always packed in her locker, always hidden. The last real thing from a life she could never fully leave behind. Now Mitchell would know about them. Mitchell would know that the angel who'd pulled him from rubble had been searching for him all along without knowing his name. She climbed into the Suburban without a word. Mercer closed the door behind her. The convoy turned back toward the hospital entrance, toward the auditors and the seized files and the beginning of the end of Whitfield's career. Hayes held the boots against her chest. Behind them, in the parking garage, her old car sat empty, engine still dead, box of belongings left on the passenger seat like a memorial to a cover that had finally, completely burned away. For hours later, Whitfield's office was cordoned with yellow evidence tape. An FBI agent in a dark suit stood guard while two analysts photographed his computer equipment, his filing cabinets, every document related to veteran patient accounts. The billing record showed a pattern so obvious it was almost insulting: inflated codes, phantom procedures, surgical times documented at double their actual complexity. The Colonel's tamponade hadn't been a complication. It was the predictable result of a surgery Whitfield had rushed, performed shortcuts he shouldn't have performed, and then billed at twice the actual cost. Hayes' meticulous charting, the same documentation style Whitfield had mocked and tried to suppress, had flagged 17 inconsistencies across 12 patient files. 17 inconsistencies that now formed the foundation of a federal fraud investigation. Whitfield's attorney arrived at 3:15 p.m., a woman with sharp cheekbones and expensive shoes who'd represented hospital administrators for 15 years. She met with Whitfield in his office for 8 minutes. Then she left. By 4:16 p.m., his medical license had entered emergency review status. By 6:38 p.m., the hospital board issued a statement suspending him immediately pending investigation. By 8:02 p.m., 3 former colleagues who'd attended his golf weekends and watched him humiliate Hayes in the break room had given statements to federal agents about billing discrepancies they'd noticed but never reported. The consequences moved like dominoes falling in slow motion. Inevitable. Undeniable. Final. 2 years later, Hayes ran Cedar Creek Medical's Veteran Services program from an office on the 3rd floor. The walls held her service record, a shadow box containing her Navy Cross citations, her Purple Hearts, and the worn combat boots, now cleaned and displayed with the care they deserved. The Colonel visited monthly, fully recovered, and called her Chief with obvious pride. He'd brought his adopted father with him on one visit, a retired Air Force officer who'd carried a 6-year-old boy into the pipeline, kept him safe through recovery, and given him a name. James Mitchell. The name of the angel's miracle. The Iraqi translator, Samir al-Rashid, worked as a cultural liaison in Hayes' department. He taught staff about combat-related trauma from the perspective of someone who'd survived it twice. He and Hayes never discussed that night in Fallujah. They didn't need to. Their work together said what words couldn't. On a Tuesday afternoon, Hayes drove past a strip mall on Wurzbach Road during her lunch break. She saw Whitfield sitting at a folding table outside a cellular phone store, sunburned and in a cheap polo shirt with an insurance company logo stretched across the chest. He was trying to sell supplemental policies to passers-by. Nobody was listening. Nobody was stopping. The table was positioned in full afternoon sun, no shade, no dignity, and Whitfield's face had collapsed into the look of a man who'd lost everything that mattered to him. Hayes didn't slow down. She didn't need to. That evening, a young night shift nurse approached Hayes nervously in the medication room. Her name was Rebecca. She was competent and careful, and she was terrified. "Chief, Dr. Morrison spoke to me really dismissively in front of a patient today. I documented it, but I don't know if I should report it, or if that makes me difficult, or..." Hayes stopped her with a look. "Listen carefully. Document everything. Be precise. Be thorough. Be professional. The truth has a way of protecting itself." She touched Rebecca's shoulder once, brief and solid. "And if anyone tells you that careful documentation is a problem, you come find me." Rebecca nodded, eyes bright, and Hayes watched her understand, really understand, that she wasn't alone. That there was someone in this hospital who'd spent 20 years learning that the quietest people, the ones who paid attention and documented carefully, were the ones holding everything together when institutions tried to break them. That the pen was sometimes stronger than the title. That precision was its own kind of courage. Hayes continued her rounds through the fluorescent-lit corridors of Cedar Creek Medical, the same hallways where she'd spent 18 months as someone else, the same hospital where she'd performed emergency surgery undercover and saved a colonel who'd been waiting his whole life to find her again. The antiseptic smell was the same. The sounds were the same. But now she moved through them with her rank acknowledged, her service honored, her identity whole. Not a nurse playing a role. A Master Chief running a program designed to protect the vulnerable from people like Whitfield. Her office nameplate read, Master Chief Petty Officer Natalie Hayes, Director of Veteran Services. Below it, a small engraved quote, the quietest person in the room might be holding it all together. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your real value, hit like and subscribe for more stories like this one. Drop a comment, would you have done what Natalie did? Would you have stayed silent and documented, or would you have revealed yourself? Let me know. And if you know someone who's fighting to be seen and heard in their own story, share this with them. We'll see you next time.